Dark Side of the Paranormal with your hosts, June Lundgren and Wendy Stanton. Stay with us as we discuss all things paranormal. Welcome to the Dark Side.
Welcome to the Dark Side of the Paranormal podcast with your hosts, Wendy Stanton, who is absent today, and June Lundgren. And we have a special guest today with us, Jeff Belanger. He's a writer, researcher, producer, and on-screen persona. He has his own podcast. He has written and contributed to several books and shows. He is also a researcher for Ghost Adventure, and I want to welcome him.
Hello, June.
How are you today, Jeff?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
Well, thanks for coming on. Now, I know you've done a lot of radio shows, a lot of them, Coast to Coast, Ghost Chronicles, all that, all the biggies. And what got you into it? What got you fascinated with the paranormal?
So I grew up in an old New England town that's, one of those towns that predates the founding of the country. And I had friends with really old houses, old by our standards, houses from like the 1760s and early 1800s and things like that. And some of them were haunted. And this was back in the, early to mid 1980s. And this is when ghosts were still very much in the closet, you may recall.
Yeah.
And they weren't out in the open like they are now. So I was just intrigued by my friend's stories because it wasn't like a Hollywood movie. There was no blood dripping out of the walls. There was no head spinning around. It was just someone else lives here with us. And so I would have sleepovers and would bring the Ouija board and would try to make contact. And I was just totally blown away and intrigued. I also grew up in the town next to Ed and Lorraine Warren. So I've known them since I was like 10 years old, 10, 11. And seen a lot of their programs and been to their house. And so I'm sure that had some influence. But more than anything, when I went to school, I wanted to be a writer. And I started working for newspapers and magazines. And around October, you go looking for ghost stories. And we were no different. And I just got hooked because I love history. I love the fact that so many fringe topics come together in what we call the paranormal. And I loved talking to people about their profound experiences. And so one article turned into another, which turned into a website, which started me writing books. And 20 years later, this is my full-time job, which is crazy, but I'm also very lucky to do it.
I was going to say, as long as you love it and love what you're doing, then that's the main thing.
Yeah, they say, if you love what you do, then you're not working a day of your life, right?
Exactly. I've been, helping people with their paranormal experiences since I was about 15 years old. And so, I'm 60 now. Don't tell anybody.
I won't. It will keep it between us.
But, it's all, back then it wasn't done. It's not like it is now.
Right.
Back then you just didn't talk about it. People would come to see you by word of mouth.
Well, if we didn't talk about it now, this podcast would be over right here, I guess.
Yeah, that's true.
So we should probably talk about it. I'm just saying.
It's crazy. What's your take on the Ouija board? A lot of people say, oh, don't use it. It's just evil. It brings in evil, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I sleep with one under my pillow.
There you go.
Just in case. So it's an amazing piece of Americana, and it's a byproduct of the spiritualist movement. I think it's important to understand these things before we judge them. So the spiritualist movement started in 1848, and pretty much everything that we do today in paranormal can trace its roots to that line in the sand. There was certainly spirit communication, even ghost hunting and things like that before 1848, but that really was a defining moment when the Fox sisters heard these knocks on the wall in Hydesville, New York, this haunted farmhouse, and it started mediumship, going on a mainstream scale and so on. And from there, psychical research and all this other stuff, it got bigger and bigger. So around the 1860s, the U.S. Civil War hits the United States, and you've got tens of thousands of people dying untimely deaths. And that was such a huge shot in the arm for the spiritualist movement, because when there's a time of turmoil, people want answers, and they don't always get them in their churches and mosques and synagogues and so on. So they were turning to mediums. Now, talking boards, which is the generic name of these devices, started to come around during that time. People would use upside down wine glasses or whatever on letters laid out, all kinds of variations of it. Automatic writing is in the same sort of ballpark. Planchettes, which is the little table that you put your hands on the Ouija board. At first, they just had a little tiny hole where you would put a pencil, and then you'd put it over a piece of paper, and it would move around and write letters out as opposed to pointing to them. So anyway, there was an evolution. It wasn't just, magicked into existence. And then 1891, the Kennard Novelty Company starts the Ouija board. They said, let's put this out on a grand scale, because when it comes to psychic mediums, some people didn't trust all of them, nor should they. Some were charlatans. And so they said, okay, let's put this in your hands. And so for a small fee, you can buy this board and you become the medium. You get the messages. You don't have to worry about if anyone's faking it or not faking it. You be the judge. And this thing was huge. It blew up. It got so big.
Yeah.
It was a parlor game, and it was they never really over-defined it, and I think that was part of the genius of marketing it. They never really said you use this to communicate with spirits. They just said this is the Ouija board. Even like where its name comes from was a bit of a enigma, and every part of it. And so it got bigger and bigger. And in 1967, it outsold Monopoly. This thing's huge. And then the reputation turned dark in the early 1970s, and it's because of this guy named William Peter Blatty, who wrote an amazing book that was turned into an incredible movie called The Exorcist, of course. Yeah. And that was a line in the sand, where there's a small scene in the movie where Reagan, the little girl's in the basement playing with the Ouija board alone, and the implication is that that's how the demon got into her, was through that means. And so since then, people have sort of talked a lot of dark stuff about it. And I remember being in Ed and Lorraine's Warren's house, and this was long before internet and email and everything else. And the phone would ring every 6 minutes. Like, that's hardly an exaggeration. It would just ring and ring. And I only heard one side of the conversation, but Lorraine Warren would pick up the phone and say, yeah, hon. Oh, that sounds bad. Is there a Ouija board in the house? And then she'd say, oh, you got to get rid of it, hon. You got to get rid of it right away. And then she'd hang up. And I thought, wow, in 1967, it outsold Monopoly. I mean, imagine if you had paranormal activity. And one of the first questions I asked you was, June, is there a Monopoly board in your house right now? You'd be like, oh, dear God, there is. Like, I do have one of those. You and like millions and millions of other people. So I think it became like this touchstone, this thing. And Lorraine would even say, if you've seen The Exorcist, that's what can happen. Don't touch those things. I disagree. I completely disagree. I believe that what we're talking about is spirit communication devices. I do accept that, like musical instruments, not everybody plays the trumpet, not everybody plays guitar, right? Like, some people get better results with a Ouija board than with dowsing rods or with EVP or whatever, and everybody's different. I completely respect and understand that. I also respect the position that you don't know what's over there, and you don't necessarily know what you're communicating with, but you have to agree that that would be true with Ouija boards, EVP, dowsing rods, talking to a K2 meter, or any other means where you say, hey, spirits, use this thing in front of me to communicate. You really don't know. So if you want to say all that's dangerous, don't do it, that's fine. That's a consistent position. But don't say, dowsing rods are okay, Ouija boards are not. I mean, it's all the same thing. You're the same.
I look at it as a tool.
It's a tool. And some people get great results with it, and it works for them, and great. So if you're afraid of it, I can also appreciate how you may want to steer clear. For example, if I had a chainsaw and you were afraid of using chainsaws, I would not like you to use my chainsaw, right? Like, respect it, sure. But if you're afraid of it, it may not go well.
Yeah. That's quite true. We have a ghost conference coming up, the Oregon Ghost Conference, and I'm giving a lecture on spirit communication, the do's and the don'ts, and it should be interesting. Last year I lectured on, of course, how to tell whether it's a dark entity or whether it's a light entity. But
by the t-shirts they're wearing. I put it
this way, if people that don't have any abilities don't know what's on the other side, and a lot of times even if you do have abilities. Negatives are kind of like a used car salesman. If their lips are moving, they're lying. So.
Right.
Yes, they could tell you they're, Abraham Lincoln. And you're like, oh, really? Okay, yeah, let's do it. But I also wanted to find out how you got hooked up with GAC.
Yeah, so Ghost Adventures, I had been, as I mentioned, I started my first website on ghosts back in 1999, if you can believe it. That was back in the baby days of the internet, and it was called ghostvillage.com, still called that. It's still around. This will be our 20-year anniversary. And so I started there, and then I started writing books about haunted places all over the world. And when Ghost Adventures, after they had filmed their initial documentary, which aired on the Sci-Fi Network, they got picked up into a series on the Travel Channel. And Zach had called my friend Dave Schrader, who does Darkness Radio and all that. Yeah, and so said, I need a guy that knows haunted places everywhere. And Dave's like, you should call Jeff. So I really have Dave to thank. And so Zach called and said, we're going to do this show. It's only going to be 8 episodes for the Travel Channel. We need your help finding locations, getting us the history, finding people that have their ghost experiences to share them on the show. And 8 episodes, that's it. And I went, well, that's cool. I mean, I've done this for newspapers, magazines. I've written books. I've done it for the web. I've never done this for television. So let's do it. And it was really great. It was a really cool experience to be part of this thing that was just starting from the ground up. And we filmed those 8 episodes, and I thought, well, okay, well, that's the end of my television career. And then they started to air. And the Travel Channel called and said, how fast can you guys get back to work? And we said, I guess tomorrow. And so that was pretty much our last day off, was 2008. And since then, I've worked on over 200 episodes, tons of specials, and it's just been such a wild ride. It's cool to be part of something that's not just big in the paranormal community, but kind of like a pop culture hit. People know it, whether you love it or hate it. People know what it is. And so it's been really fun to be a part of that, to see it change and evolve over the years, and to see that the people involved really do have a passion for this subject.
Oh yeah, I was on one of the episodes called Graveyards of the Pacific, Norblad Hostel.
Yeah.
And I was talking with Zach and stuff, off camera, and it's like he really cares about the people that he's with. He wants to make sure that they're protected, that there's nothing there that can harm them or anything like that. I respect that, and that's totally awesome.
Yeah,
very nice, very nice man.
Tricky too, right? I mean, because everything that he does is so out there, right? I mean, for all to see, and people judge it. I always joke with people. I'm like, we have access to the internet too. When people say all kinds of things, positive and negative, we get to see all of it. And and you're just like, I know not everyone will agree, but man, I give them credit for putting it out there.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, you're going to have some naysayers. I don't care what you do, who you are. So it's just, you have to learn to roll with it, because if you get hurt after everything people say, then you have to develop a thick skin. You can't, be thin-skinned and stay, sane in it. It's very fickle too. TV is very fickle. I have friends that I was in the UK last September, and I have friends over there that I stayed with, and they're like, Zach, he's big over there too.
Yeah.
He has some shows that he's working with over there. And they're saying, we watch him, we think he's cool. We take everything with a kind of a grain of salt, but then they really like him over there, and it's kind of cool. And I did some visiting, like Hampton Court when I was over there, and met King Henry VIII. So, little things.
How's he doing?
Oh God, he's like, the first thing out of his mouth was witch, and I'm like, bite me. You're fatter and bigger than your picture. Okay. Slammed the door. I was doing that. I wasn't going to do Hampton Court, but a friend of mine, Howard Hughes from the Unexplained Files.
Okay.
He lives a couple blocks away. He said, you really got to go. You got to go. So the last the last day, full day that we were there, we went and spent the day at Hampton Court. And it's quite beautiful place, very interesting, a lot of activity. It seems to be one of the most haunted locations in all of England. That's what they say anyway, but they say that about everything.
They also, yeah, that sign hangs over many places over there. This is the most haunted place in all of England. And the place right next door has the same sign. Like, how could you both be?
Yeah, let me think about that. Are you number one and you're number two? I know, but there's so much history over there. That gets me. So much
it's
history.
Great. I've been to England several times, and I love the ghost culture over there is so much more matter of fact than it is here. So I was at a place called Ordsall Hall up north near Manchester, and there's this. It's a 700-year-old building, and I asked one of the docents. I said, "Well, is this place haunted?" And he just looked at me in disgust. He's just said, "It's a 700-year-old manor house. Of course it's haunted. Don't be ridiculous, right?" I mean, that's a silly question. And I said, "Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize."
They're proud of their ghosts over there.
Yeah. Well, it's not a thing, right? Like when you say ghost in where I live in New England, we have a lot of that same sort of, matter of fact mentality when it comes to it. Like, oh yeah, that 200-year-old building's haunted. I've heard that too. Where do you want to go get dinner? Right. I mean, it's not a big thing. In certain parts of the country, though, when you say ghost, you just treaded into the waters of religion and spirituality for some people, not for me, not for you, I'm guessing, but for some people, that it's now you're talking about something that's religious, and I have, then people have very specific beliefs on where they should or should not fall on the religious spectrum, and then it turns into like a thing, as opposed to don't make it a thing. It's okay. It doesn't undermine anything you believe in. It doesn't hurt that. Just be okay with it. And we live in a time and a country where none of that works. Unfortunately.
It's just, it's a fact of life. If you stop and think about it, for years when you're growing up and your parents tell you, the religious side of it, it's like, oh, when you die, you're going to go to heaven and you're going to float around in a cloud and you're going to be playing, you're going to be happy. Blah,
I want
blah.
the harp. I want to have the little harp. Yeah.
I want an electric one.
Yeah,
but
right.
The thing is, it's like, that's their way of talking about it, of saying, there's no ghosts. I've had people say there's no such thing as ghosts. There's no such thing as, demons. It's just, or you get the ones that are in between where it's either a good spirit or a bad spirit. There is no in between.
Yeah. And I mean, people don't work like that. Walk to like a crowded mall. Do you think there's only good people and bad people in that crowded mall, or are they all on the spectrum somewhere, right? Like all, like we try to be good. We have bad days, whatever.
There are shades of gray, believe it or not,
I do.
Yeah. It's like, come on, people. It's just like, when, somebody calls me, somebody sends me an email or whatever, and they're like, I think there's something negative in my house. Like, not always is it negative. It could be grandma. It could be grandpa. It could be Uncle John. What makes you think that there's something negative there? You have to really dig into it, because a lot of people automatically assume that it's bad. If something's moving, if something's, they hear footsteps, it's automatically bad. But it's not necessary. It could be somebody in the house.
I think part of that comes from, too, that if you're in your house at night and you hear someone walking around downstairs or down the hall or whatever, and that, no one else is supposed to be in the house, you should be scared. That is a time to be scared. You may have an intruder. So you wake up and you look and you go, oh my, there's no one here. The door's locked. There's no broken windows or anything. Oh my goodness, I'm scared. Therefore, it must be negative. Well, no, you're scared. And I understand that. And that's the right response to that stimulation. However, that doesn't mean that thing was there to harm you in any way. Even though it is indeed a frightening experience. So you're right. So, just because you're scared doesn't mean that it was a negative thing.
Yeah, I try to instill that in people, because it's like, it's not everything is bad. And I understand, I understand that you're scared. I understand that you're concerned, but you know, you have to walk through it with the person, talk to them, you know, dig more information out, and have them do their research, their due diligence by, you know, researching the home, the land, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You know, so they can take part in it, so they can help themselves.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because you can't. One of the things I've tried to explain, especially when you're dealing with private homes, which is a whole tricky thing, right? I mean, that's, you know, because very rarely is it only a paranormal problem. Often there could be drug or alcohol abuse, there could be violence issues, there could be psychological issues, abuse issues, you know, going on in the home, and they look for something to blame other than themselves, and that really gets into tricky area. And so at that point, I always say you must be part of the solution. And working for Ghost Adventures, people will track me down, and I'll get emails, I'll get phone calls saying, you got to get Zach here. And I'm like, look, if it's bigger than paranormal, if there's drug addiction and all this other stuff, what if the Pope came for like a week? You know, when the Pope leaves, you will still be addicted to drugs. You will still have the violence issues. You'll still have all the other psychological issues going on. There's no magic pill for this. You have to work at it. You have to be part of the solution. You know, don't expect someone to come in and just clean this up and your life is going to magically be better. It just doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. And, you know, I've had people contact me and say, you know, my girlfriend and I are having problems. Can you help us with that?
Whoa.
I said, you know, maybe you should see a counselor. I said, I do want to let you know that I don't do people. I only do the dead. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't fix your problem. I'm sorry. Maybe some counseling, you know?
Yeah, that's right. But people don't want to do that. They don't want to hear about it. They just want to hear about, well, I'm going to come in and do an exorcism, and I'm going to say this prayer and burn this sage, and you'll be all better by the time I leave.
Yeah, they want a quick fix. Unfortunately, you know, I make people work for it. I mean, I'm not going to, sure, I can go in there. Sure, I can take out whatever's there. But the thing is, if you don't change your ways, if you don't get help, then none of that's going to work. You're going to be right back to square one. And I try to counsel people about that sort of thing when I do go in. We sit down, we talk about it, what's going on, what they have to do to follow through and to maintain, you know, the integrity of their home after the thing is removed, if there is anything. So it's all a part of them taking part of helping themselves. That's huge.
Here. I'm with you.
Yeah, it's people think, okay, you're going to come in, you're going to take it out. Hey, no problem. That's it. But it's not. I could take it out. I could be back every week if you don't take care of yourself and do what you need to do to change things. I was going to ask you, are you, do you do any kind of like, I talked to Tim Wiesberg last week, and he does a lot of philanthropic type things. He goes around and gives lectures at museums and stuff, and there's the money that he gets goes all to the museum to help keep them open and functioning. Do you do anything like that as well?
I did tons of events with Tim over the years. We called them legend tripping events, where we would do that. We raised a ton of money for the preservation of a lot of those buildings. So yeah, no, it's so to me, you know, the most fun part is getting the opportunity to go into some of these old historic buildings after hours when it's closed, when no one else is around, and get this special access. It's really great. And people want to do that, and they want to be part of it, and they want to preserve it. So no, I've done tons of those. I've done tons of them with Tim. For years we've done them. So yeah, there's it's an opportunity, you know, because to me, the most simple definition of a ghost is that it's history demanding to be remembered. It's the past coming to the present. And that's we can learn from that, and that's worth exploring. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's good to preserve. I actually live on the Oregon Trail, literally. It's in my front yard.
Right.
So we have like, back in 19, say my son's, I don't know, back in about 10 years ago, they did a reenactment of the Oregon Trail, complete with covered wagons and everything. And they went by the front yard, and I thought that was cool. That was really awesome. And then they created an interpretive center. And the thing is, though, that once they did that, it kind of stirred up some of the local ghosts.
Okay.
I was heading home one day, and I was coming from my house, going to my mother's house. She lives a couple miles away, and all of a sudden, this little girl pops into my passenger seat. Scared the living tar out of me because I wasn't expecting anybody to pop in there. And she had like, the pigtails, and she had the pinafore and the bonnet and everything hanging down the back. And she's like, I said, who are you? She told me her name and that she just woke up. I'm like, oh, really? I said, you've been gone a while, but she would pop in I kept trying to get her to cross, but she wasn't willing to, she was one of those that can see the changes of time and stuff like that, but she just was enjoying, the changes and seeing things. And that lasted for about a year, and I finally was able to talk her into crossing back over. And she comes back once in a while. She pops in. But for the most part, she's gone.
So
they can activate,
Right. But do you think there are like true earthbound spirits that just absolutely can't leave? They're here?
Yeah, there are a few. Not as many as people would think. There's a little boy in a graveyard, a pioneer graveyard, right behind where I work. And I get this little voice saying, "Come to the graveyard." And I'm like, "No, I'm busy." It was a Saturday. So I finally gave in, and he's there. And, I roll in and I park, and I see there's deer passing through. Got a buck and several does. And so I'm taking pictures of him. And he's like, no, over here. And so I swing around and I take his picture, and I captured an image of him. And he starts
Hello?
laughing. He says, "No, silly. I'm having." Oh,
I just lost you for a second, June.
Okay, so we were talking about earthbound spirits.
Yeah, because one of the things I've said with earthbound spirits is that I've never encountered a building that haunted all the time. Where you could go there right now, open the door, and be like, "There's the ghost, wave." So I'm always curious, where do they go?
True, they do come and go. They're not stuck in a building per se. If they're true earthbound spirits, they'll stay pretty close to home. They can go like next door. They do frequently, walk around, visit other areas and look in on other things. And that's why it's not always like, say, I go in there yesterday and I find 3 of them in there. You go in there today and find none of them in there. Because, and another thing is they can come from different eras. And I found over the years that, say one comes from the 1600s, and one from the 1900s, but they not know about each other. It's kind of
right.
It's kind of bizarre to me, but each one of them is stuck in their own time zone per se. And they're like, "Huh? What? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who you're talking about. I'm the only one here," which
right.
is hilarious, But they do come and go if they've already, crossed per se and ascended, then they can come and go in visitation, just like our family does. But for the most part, they're not really that many true earthbounds. There's ones that come and go all the time. Henry VIII is one that comes and goes. As much of a pain in the rear as he was. But you don't. It's odd to find true ones unlike the little boy in the graveyard I was talking about, Edward. He didn't want to cross. He loves playing with the deer that come through all the time. And I said, well, don't you want to be with your mom and dad? And he's like, no, I'm fine. He said, I'll talk to you sometimes. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to push you. If you don't want to cross, that's your deal. I come across that quite frequently on the Queen Mary. I visited that back in 2008. And there was a couple on the dance floor. And the first thing I heard was music. And I'm like, I'm looking around. And it's like, and there's this couple on the dance floor. And they're like, no, we love it here. We want to stay here. We met here. We married on the Queen Mary. And we spent all of our all of our anniversaries here and celebrations. Said, if we want to stay here. I'm like, okay, cool. Have a good time.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I've been on the Queen Mary a bunch.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's just, the thing is, it's all about free will. If they want to do it, hey, go for it. If you want to stay, and like I'll come across sometimes somebody will call me into a house thing, and it's like, okay, this is who's here, and do you want to, is it okay if they stay? Can they live with you and you coexist in peace? If that's, if they agree, if the owners, the living agrees, then it's fine. You set the boundaries, the ground rules, and move on. And they're like, oh yeah, that's, that's so-and-so. Don't worry about it. They're fine. They don't bother you. I think that's awesome that they can live with them. If they don't want to cross, if the dead don't want to cross and they want to continue to live there, then fine. Just coexist in peace.
Sure.
And even be helpful. They can
charge them rent.
Somebody coming, be there or whatever. They can be good babysitters and watchdogs. Yeah. So let's see here. The books. Tell us about the books that you've written.
That's a huge question. I've written 15.
I know.
So I started back, my first book came out in 2004 and was called The World's Most Haunted Places. The Queen Mary was in that book and still is in that book. And from there, to me, a book is like an exorcism. It's this idea that kicks around. And if you don't deal with it, it starts to haunt you. And if you still don't deal with it, it gets bigger and bigger. And then eventually the only way to get it out is, to write it all down. And so early on, I was quite prolific. I was writing like 2 or 3 a year, which is a tough pace to keep up, especially, now that I'm working on Ghost Adventures and doing my weekly podcast and things like that. I can't keep that pace up. But it's what I've learned as a storyteller over the decades now is that now that I've worked in television and worked in audio and worked in, different medias,
right?
You have to let the story dictate how it should be told. So, for example, there could be a neat little story that it just doesn't warrant a 250-page book, but maybe it only warrants a 4-minute YouTube video. Where you're just like, hey, look at this. Like a perfect example would be the gum wall in Seattle, right? It's just what a great, weird, disgusting, awesome landmark. And for people who don't know, the gum wall is right near the famous market there. And it's right on the side of the theater. And people take chewed gum and stick it to a specific wall. And there's like literally a million pieces of chewed bubble gum, all different colors. And one of mine's on there too. I did contribute when I was there. And it's just this fun thing. And so I grabbed my phone and I took a video. And I'm like, how disgustingly awesome is this landmark in Seattle? It's this gum wall. Now, is there a book there? God, no. Like, what could you say, for all those pages, right? So it's just a fun video, I think, covers that. But these stories make our communities unique. They connect us with each other. And I think if you listen to the story, if you let it lead you, it'll tell you how it should be told. And so different books, I've covered different topics, all pretty much in and around the paranormal, haunted places, the history, the folklore, the legends, all that stuff, because I think all of it is part of the story. And so I just finished this past weekend. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro 2 years ago, and it was
Cool.
such a profound physical and spiritual experience for me that I knew I wanted to write about it, and I did, and I finally finished revising that memoir just this past weekend, and now I'm shopping it. So hopefully that'll find a home. But that's a different type of story for me, but very profoundly spiritual.
Yeah.
You
It
know,
doesn't matter. Some
yeah.
stories have to be told, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I had to deal with it. I had to write it. Otherwise, it wouldn't leave me alone. Otherwise, it's tough maybe for some people to quite grasp that, but it just literally nags at you until you've wrung it all out of you. And that's how books work for me anyway.
I understand completely. I have like 8 books, and you know, and the one I'm working on 4.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah, one that's going to be out this coming June is just, it's taken on a life. Once you sit down and start writing, it just takes on a life of its own. And you plan to say, okay, I'm only going to write like 200 pages. You know, it should be just 200 pages. But you can't just do that. You have to continue the book until it ends. You know, you can't just say, I'm going to write 200. Just keep coming until it's done.
Yeah.
That's the way it hits me. And I have a kind of a different writing style. I don't like start at the beginning and work my way back. I start like in the middle and work my way both ends.
Hey, whatever works. You know,
Yeah.
everybody's got their own way of doing it. For me, I like to, I see the introduction in my head. Like the idea is kicking around, and then like I could be in the shower or just, you know, walk into the mailbox and suddenly I'm like, I got it. I know how this begins for me. And once I have that, then I do have the freedom to jump around. Like, okay, I'll work on the middle here. I know I want to research this or add that. And then it all comes together right on any other medium other than a computer. I mean, people used to use paper. And because I'm very much like, oh, let me cut this giant chunk and paste it over here, and now let me move this back there and move this up here. Yeah. And so I love that it's like molding clay, you know, where you're putting chunks and going, oh, this is great, but it doesn't go here. It should go later, and you have the freedom to do that.
I have that, you know, I have like 3 huge screens, and it's like, okay, I'm going to move this one to that one to this one, and that one doesn't look right. And a lot of times, though, I'll have to print it out to see how it flows.
Sure.
And actually physically see it. Yeah, I'm old school, you know, around a while.
Well, I also, you know, the other thing too is I'm lucky that I have people that are willing to read for me, and it's a huge ask when you asking someone to read for you, critically read, not just be like, oh, it's nice, good job, right? That doesn't help me at all. It's the people that can say, hey, you lose steam here, or this isn't clear, or I want to know more of this. You didn't tell me enough. I would like to know a whole lot more. Or you told me way too much. Cut this back.
I have 2 people that do it for me, and they're both, you know, one's in England and one's in Chicago. And it's like, you know, I give them what I've written, and they go through it and they make suggestions, or like, you know, didn't you say this in page such and such, or you think you're repeating yourself, or maybe you need to meet this out a little more, give us a little more information, you know, that sort of thing. You know,
it's a process.
It's always great. It's always great feedback.
Yeah, and it's a process. It's a thing that like I said, you don't do it for the money because they really don't pay very well. So you do it because you obviously have to, and you have some story to tell and some compulsion to tell it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, I've always been an avid reader from the time, you know, I used to hide myself in the libraries and just pick out, I would think of a topic and just pour over everything I could find on it. Oh, of course, this was before internet. And, you know, it's hours in the library, you know, digging through books and things like that, you know, the Dewey Decimal File. Nowadays, you know, you can get on the web or whatever. But when I write a book, I'm the type of person that I don't want to know about other books that are written on the same thing, because I want to be able to give it, you know, write it. I don't want any influence, external influence.
Sure.
From when I'm writing. It's just, this is how I got it. This is how I perceive it. And with the connection that I have to the other side, this is the information I'm getting from them, and, blah, blah, blah. So, people say, well, haven't you read this or haven't you read that? I'm like, no, I haven't. I don't have time to read. I work full time as a nurse still. I work 4 days a week, 10-hour days. I do not have any time for that between writing and the podcast and, a home life. So it's like, it's all, you have to juggle everything. But so do you have any new upcoming events besides the release of your book?
Well, I don't know when it'll get released. I'm just trying to sell it to a publisher right now. So, no, I've got, I do a speaking tour every year, and that's usually between, 50 and 70 speaking events each year, especially in the fall. So I speak at libraries and conferences and everything, and I love that part of the experience because when you share a story in person, you get to connect directly with the audience, and you get to look in their eyes, and you get to see how they react to different parts of it. And so that's one of my favorite things to do, is to share these stories and these experiences in front of a live audience. I'll be in Connecticut tomorrow night for a program, and I've got a few coming up in the spring, but then in the fall, there's 31 days in October. It's not uncommon for me to be booked like 30 of them. So, yeah. So, but it's part of it, and always working to get better at it.
Should come out to the Oregon Ghost Conference.
I would love to. Have them bring me out.
Yeah, March 29th, 30th, 31st.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's like we have thousands of people attend, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And
that's great.
I need to talk. When you come out, he's the one that started it years ago. He was a teacher of my son's in high school, and this is the 8th annual one. So it's been getting bigger and bigger with each progressive year.
That's excellent.
So, yeah, maybe I should have. I'll email Rocky and see about if he, because he'd be a great speaker for us. I mean, great speaker.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm fortunate. I've done paranormal conferences in Australia and in England and all over the U.S. and I'm happy to do them if they're willing to bring me out. But it's again, I love that, and it's fun to meet people that are passionate about it directly. People that are watching the shows and reading the books, because it's inspiring. It lets you know where people are going with it. Where you want to go with it. And it's funny to have conversations that I've noticed. I've done this long enough that, for a while, orbs were like all the big thing, right? And then they all kind of went away.
Yeah.
They just no one talked about them anymore, which was fine. And then people are talking about them again. I'm like, I thought I had this conversation like 12 years ago, and here we are again.
I know it is. I had one question. Any dark encounters?
Well, I mean, on Ghost Adventures, I think there's plenty that we've experienced personally. Yeah, personally, I've been fortunate that I guess that stuff's not drawn to me. I've been around things happening that are strange and unusual, but I didn't feel threatened. I've even had something follow me home once, but it didn't feel threatening. It was just kind of there and then gone.
They get curious and they'll follow people home. It's like, which is kind of cool in one way, as long as they don't try to, stick close to you.
Well, it was a strange thing. So I was at a place called the Victorian Mansion in Gardner, Massachusetts, and Ghost Adventures is filmed there. Ghost Hunters is filmed there. We were I was there before the shows. I knew the owners, and they took us around, and they told me all kinds of crazy stuff happening all over that house. You name it. I mean, it was all over. The most boring thing that they told me was that they'd be in bed at night in the master bedroom, and something would come up, and it felt like two hands placing their hands on the mattress and just shaking it until they'd wake up, like just the foot of the mattress. And I went, that's really weird. And then we went around the rest of the house, and I got home pretty late that night and went to bed, and I'm sound asleep, and I wake up to something shaking the foot of my mattress. And I went, So I wake up and I go, okay, wait a minute. That's just psychosomatic. I must have dreamt it, because that was the most boring experience he told me about the whole night, right? That was not the memorable one. And so I take a deep breath, I smile, and I'm ready to go back to sleep. And all of a sudden it shakes again. Well, I'm very much awake. And, okay, that really just happened. And, my daughter was really young at the time, like 2 years, just down the hall. And I'm lying awake now for another shoe to drop, but it didn't. That was the whole story right there.
Like, I'm here.
Yeah, it was just like, that was really weird. And then it didn't happen again.
Oh, that's bizarre. That's cool though. It's it's a first-hand experience.
Yeah, no, it happens. It's very rare for me. I'm not very sensitive. In 20 years of doing this, I can count. I really think that is something truly paranormal. That's something I can't explain.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's in one way that's good. At least you don't have to encounter the negatives. It's just not for everybody, and but that's the way it is. Somebody has to do it. Somebody got to do it. Somebody got to take it.
Right.
Anyway, so I want to thank you for being on the show, and you're a lovely person, and I enjoyed having you on the show. I'm just sorry that Wendy missed you. She was looking forward to it, but she had to work this morning and she had a meeting. So otherwise,
she called earlier to say that she was sorry to miss me. So that's I'm sorry to miss her as well. Appreciate it.
I'd love having you, and maybe we can get together again, and I'll contact Rocky and say, hey, we need to get Jet out there. Okay?
Sounds great.
All right. You take care of yourself.
You too. Thank you, June.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The dark side is always there, waiting for us to enter us. Until next time, try to enjoy the daylight.